I think we live in a context now where through social media, the world can feel very small. As for what Christians should do in a context like this, no matter whether the culture is very much in favor of Christianity or very opposed to Christianity, our calling doesn't really change. To live as a witness to God's grace in the nitty-gritty, mundane moments of life.
Hello and welcome to the March or Die show today. Glad to have you joining. This is, of course, the show where we do our best. And I have to say we do our best. We don't always get it right, but we do our best every episode to give you the principles and perspectives you need to march when it would be easier to stay where you are and die. We've talked about what that means in the past, but there are so many things that come up in our lives. And as we pursue God and we pursue a life of faith and we really do our best to move forward, there are things that will pop up that push us back. And in those moments, we have to make a decision. Are we going to stay where we are? Are we going to die? Are we going to give up? Or are we going to keep moving forward? And so that's what we talk about here. Very glad to have you joining. If you're not subscribed to the show, please subscribe right now, wherever you're listening from. Go ahead and subscribe and then take some time, go over to the YouTube channel and check us out there. A lot I could say there, and I won't because I'm excited about our guest today. Tim Challies is with us. Man, Tim, if you don't know him, you need to. He is a pastor. He's an author. He's a speaker. He's a blogger. And he is someone who has become, to me and to the people kind of in my world, a huge resource for resources, for books and other resources that help us see the world right and understand perspectives and principles as we talk about here and really learn to move forward. Tim, it is great to have you on the show. Thank you for making time for us.
No, you're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
I'm sure you serve this purpose for a lot of people as a resource and point people to, again, books and your blog and all of those kind of things. In the work that we do here at Mighty Oaks, we work with veterans and first responders. We have programs. We do tons of counseling and those kind of things. And so our team is super excited that I have the opportunity to talk to you as well because they use you as a resource. We're constantly sending around links to books that you have recommended, and we'll talk about that here in a little while too. But thank you for what you do. You've been a blessing to us. Man, so many different directions I'd like to go, but I want to start with just basic Christian living. I think we've lost a sense, probably in the West, maybe more than other places. I don't know. We talk about, our experience here in the West as being the only experience. I know that's not the case, but there are so many things that distract Christians and that keep us focused on stuff that's really not that important. There are cultural issues around us. There are, experiences that come into our lives. And I think so often we lose our focus on what is important and what we should be doing as Christians and how we should be living as Christians. And a lot of that comes back to just, basic habits and principles and perspectives on what God's called us to do and how we can carry that out. And, you write about this and you talk about this, but as a pastor, certainly, as an author, all of those things, but as a dad, as a husband, as a Christian, how would you characterize maybe where we are as a Christian community? And then what is it that we should be focused on? Or what are some of the things that we should be focused on as we seek to live out the life that God's called us to live?
Sure. I've had the privilege of traveling far and wide.
Yeah.
Even just, I released a project recently that took me to local churches in a dozen different countries just to worship with them and see how they honor the Lord in their own context and culture. So it's been fascinating to spend a lot of time on the road, a lot of time with believers in other contexts. And one of my big takeaways is we may not be the normal ones. What we count as normal may actually be very abnormal when measured across the rest of humanity. But where I see us, and I should say, even my context in Canada is quite different from those who
I forgot to mention you were Canadian.
States.
I was trying to keep that on the down low, but I forgot to.
Yeah, well, and then I spoke, they could probably hear my accent. But, I think in Canada, we're very much into a post-Christian environment right now, where we're seeing what does it mean to try and chase down the loose ends of Christianity and get them out of the context of our culture. Now, God can arrest that by his grace, but that's certainly, I think, how Christians are feeling now in Canada, at least. And I think to some degree, depending on your experience in the U.S., your location, et cetera, there may be some of that as well, where the Christian wave has sort of crested, or the wave of integrating scriptural ideas into the nation has crested, and now people are actively hunting those out and trying to remove and eradicate them. So I think we're going to learn together what it means to live in this kind of a post-Christian world. I'm absolutely convinced the Bible is equal to it, that the Holy Spirit is equal to it, that Christians can not only survive, but even thrive in a world like this. And I can say that with confidence because I've seen that in many places in the world where Christians don't enjoy many of the rights that we think are essential to worship, essential to be a Christian, and yet they get along very well, continue to love God and trust Him and serve Him. So God, by His grace, can arrest any slide, of course. He may reverse the tide. He may make our nations better than they've ever been. All of this is possible. And we can and should pray for such things. But yeah, we're at a unique time in history right now, and a fascinating one as well.
How should Christians think about this moment? So again, there are 1,000 different voices. I've been interested over the last couple of weeks just to observe from the outside, right? Observe how Christian leaders are taking such a strong position against other Christian leaders. So you have these big Christian voices saying, you need to do this, and if you don't do this, then you don't love Jesus, or you're a coward or something, right? So we've seen a lot of that, and then others pushing back on that. And I think just as a Christian community, when we look to pastors and leaders and those who should be speaking truth and giving direction with clarity, it's become anything but that. It can be very, very hard, I think, to be a Christian, to know what to do, to pursue what we really should be focused on. We're told we have to focus on all this stuff, and this is important, and that's important, and this thing, and do this thing, and do that thing, and if you don't do that, then there's something wrong with you. Meanwhile, I think Christians are drowning in a cultural sea of brokenness and hurt and confusion and darkness. Where should we be focused as a husband, as a father, as a parent who's trying to raise kids, as someone who's working a job and trying to be a faithful Christian? Where should we be focused? What should we be doing or thinking? And how do we understand what's happening?
Yeah, well, as it pertains to how we respond to things in the wider culture, I think we all should agree that the person who's best suited to know what his church needs in any given moment is the pastor. And not some rando out there on, out there in the Twitterverse or something.
Right, sure.
We should allow pastors a lot of leeway to lead their church in a way that's appropriate to their pastor. So some of the situations that have happened in the last few weeks that caught national attention, some were very, very relevant to a specific local church, and some of those were completely irrelevant to a specific local church. And far be it from me or anyone else to say what a pastor in that context should or must talk about or bring to the attention of his congregation. We have to grant that each pastor is in charge of his local church, and I have zero authority and very little responsibility toward those other people. In fact, my responsibility should probably be to butt out and to be careful about giving those big, wide statements about what another pastor must do, except, of course, those things that are clearly laid out in Scripture.
That's good.
I think we live in a context now where through social media, the world can feel very small. We can all be somewhat voyeuristic toward other churches and other Christians, just sort of gaze at them from afar without understanding of their context, without compassion, without any of that. And we can also be busybodies where we get engaged or involved in other people's churches where we have no right. As for what Christians should do in a context like this, I don't know that I've ever found better guidance than 1 Thessalonians 4, which has been just a key verse or a key series of verses in my own life. And I think it presses us toward the biblical emphasis of, brothers, we ask and urge you, just as you receive from us how you ought to walk and to please God, just as you're doing, you do so more and more. So Paul's writing to this church. He's saying, I've told you what to do. Just keep doing that. And what is it? The instructions we gave you, that this is the will of God, your sanctification. What does it look like to live a sanctified Christian life? In this context, abstain from sexual immorality and work hard, love one another and work hard. Those are, and then avoid being a busybody or getting involved in other people's business. So each one of us has a calling from the Lord to love God and serve others, to love the Lord our God with our whole heart, soul, mind, and strength, to love our neighbor as ourselves. And there's a lifetime of challenge just in that, in simply loving the people around us, abstaining from all those temptations that are so close to us, loving others, and just working hard in this world, being a good testimony to the people around us.
Yeah, that's
so
good.
No matter whether the culture is very much in favor of Christianity or very opposed to Christianity, our calling doesn't really change: to live as a witness to God's grace in the nitty gritty, mundane moments of life.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, it's keeping your head down, doing what we've been called to do. That's good. I think sometimes we forget that passages like that were written in a cultural moment, not dissimilar from the one we're living in. There was a lot of chaos, a lot of confusion, a lot of immorality for sure, and voices on probably all sides, from the government, from religious leaders and the elites in the religious world, telling people what to do and how to live. One of the things that you spend a lot of time on is producing lists of books and recommending books and talking about books and even pushing links to Kindle books and other things out. That's been a blessing to me, and I know many others. Can you talk about why that's important to you? The role of books maybe in the Christian life and our understanding of some of these broader issues and broader topics. I'd love to even understand how you select a book and say that this is a good one, right? Or this is something you should read. We all have ideas on that. But I was telling you before we started, someone asked me a couple of weeks ago, you've pastored, you've done this, you've done that, but you've never been to Bible college. How do you explain that? I think some people have a hard time with that. And I said, well, I can read. So, I really have been able to learn from other people. I just haven't sat necessarily in a Bible class or a seminary class, but I've learned from a lot of other people. Can you talk about the importance of books in our world and in our relationships with others and with the Lord?
Yeah. So like yourself, I'm sure I would agree with you. There's absolutely a place for seminary, and what a blessing for those who have a full-time call to ministry, to be able to go and get that preparation. And yet we're so blessed that those of us who didn't have that opportunity for whatever reason have all those resources available to us. So none of us has an excuse not to learn, not to grow, not to have access to all this stuff. It's amazing what we can grab hold of. We 21st century English speakers are spoiled beyond measure.
Yeah.
And if there's anything we want to know, anything we want to learn, it's available to us. It's incredible. One of the joys of my life is being not just a creator of content, but also a curator of content. So I write books, I write articles, and I love doing that. But I get equal joy out of curating, out of collecting what other people have written and then presenting it to the world and saying, well, here are recommendations on this, something to read, topically arranged, commentaries, Kindle books, whatever. I'm a big believer in reading, just as pleasure and as almost a spiritual discipline, just a way to grow in knowledge of God and of His Word and of His world. Like I just said, we're just incredibly blessed with the amount of books and the quality of books that are available to us. Of course, there's tons and tons of really bad books out there as well. So one of the things I enjoy doing is trying to sort through them, not just to lead people away from bad and toward good, but also to lead people from good to the best. Because, any given topic, if you think about the Trinity, broad topic, you can find some truly horrific books on it. You can find some truly wonderful books. You can find some just kind of okay books. And so I like leading people to the best of the books that they could, really learn, pack a punch, if you will, get the best bang for their buck. So again, we're really blessed to have access to so many good books. And it's a joy to be able to help people with that. And then even to serve people as they read, to help people realize you can get through books like this, that they can be difficult at first, but like any topic, theology can be difficult to get into because you don't know the lexicon, you don't know the specific words, you don't know the definitions. And a lot of people give up too fast. But if you press on, as you did in your history books when you're a student, your biology textbooks, you press on, you start to wrap your mind around the concepts. Things become much more familiar. You can start to read at a brisker pace and so on. So there's a lot of good reason to press on, to develop the habit and to grow in it.
How do you determine what you would consider to be a good book or one that wouldn't be a good book? Is that just you read it and come to that conclusion? Or is there a criteria used to determine this is a good one, I'm going to recommend this, or I'm not?
Yeah, I don't have strict criteria, but obviously, if a book goes against the Bible in any, especially in a very substantial way, it says something that is untrue or it denies a core truth, then yeah, it would not be a good book. There's just a lot of books in the Christian world that are okay. There's nothing wrong with them. They're just not all that good. And part of that is just a product of how many books are being written, which can be a blessing, but also just means there's a lot of overlap.
Sure.
And so, if you've read 8 books on marriage, it can be pretty hard to get enthusiastic about the ninth, because it probably is just quoting those other 8 and may not have a whole lot more to say. So the more you read, in a sense, the less you need to read. You've kind of covered all those concepts, and maybe you don't need to read any more marriage books. It's not to say you've mastered it, but another book isn't going to give you knowledge you don't already have. And so maybe that's now time to start broadening into different concepts, different topics.
Do you read in, just personally, do you read in specific categories? Like I like to, I always have a few books going at the same time. One would be fiction. I enjoy reading fiction. It's just different than what I read otherwise. And so it keeps my mind sharp and imaginative and all those things. Something related to Christian living or theology would be a second category. And then the third category would either be history or biography, or sometimes a self-help type of book. It's just, something about the brain or something about the body or whatever, something that would be just personally helpful. So I try to think in 3 different categories. Do you think that way? Do you focus on one over the other, or how do you think about, your own personal reading?
When I'm at my most organized, then I try to read across different categories and mix things up pretty well. Most of my reading, though, is done for a purpose. So as a pastor, most of his reading is probably heading toward a sermon or heading toward something going on in the life of the church. A lot of my reading is toward review. What books can I review? And often I'll have to start 3 or 4 or 5 books before I find one I actually believe is worth reviewing. And so in that way, some of my reading has become, commoditized or something. I'm not doing it just for the joy of reading. I'm just trying to find books that I can stand behind and say to others, here's a book you may want to read. So for that reason, I might read books that I'm not the audience for at all. I just read a children's book about the book of Romans. Really helpful. I'm definitely not the target audience. It's for grade schoolers, but a good reader. I'll read books for women or books for seniors and just try and vary my reading. And I think there's a lot of value in reading that. Men can read books for women too, and you might learn something that would be helpful to you. So a lot of my reading then is not done for the sheer pleasure of it. It's kind of an extension of the work I do.
When you think about authors, I had this conversation with some of the members of our team a few weeks ago. When you think about authors, do you tend to put more credibility on those who have written 200 years ago versus those who are more recent? Or how do you think about authorship?
The great majority of the reading I do is from about 100 to 150 years ago. I love that kind of late Victorian era, the very late 1800s. I have a few authors there that I can just read endlessly and really, really enjoy and benefit from their work. So that's my pleasure to read those books. And that's where I find the work that best feeds my soul. That said, 2 things. One, you'll be amazed how relevant books are that were written a long time ago. You'll find that some of the topics really do resonate across the years, and some things we think are uniquely ours. Like I was reading an American author from the late 1800s recently who was talking about tariffs. Well, and he's talking to his church about tariffs in one of his sermons. So there's an issue that's become relevant. Maybe it wouldn't have occurred to us that Americans have been through this, and the rest of the world through this many times over. He was also talking about just the sheer cruelty of the Democrats toward the Republicans. Now, this was in the late 1800s. He was marveling at the polarization of politics and the cruelty of the parties toward one another. That could be written today. And yet here it is that long ago. So there is a lot that resonates, even though it's very old. On the other hand, transgenderism was not a thing. Nobody had that category for, you might be a man trapped in a woman's body. That nobody understood that. So for that kind of reading, you absolutely do need more recent authors, or scholarship on the Trinity has advanced in the last year. Scholarship in a lot of areas has advanced. Some of the concerns about marriage, old marriage books, they might be talking about household servants and the help they give you and how to, have a good marriage when you have servants around. Well, that's not really relevant to the great majority of us today.
Right.
So there are limitations, and therefore there's good reasons to read contemporary books as well.
Yeah. One of the things about books related to theology of the Bible that I try to be careful with authors who are still living. And I hate that I've written a number of books, and I'm not against reading current authors, but until someone dies, you don't know how the story ends, right? And so sometimes it's helpful to look at someone who kind of the body of their work. Maybe I don't agree with everything, but I can endorse the body of their work. And to my knowledge, there's nothing out there that went, super crazy or super sideways. And so there's some confidence in that. And I think that can be helpful too when we think about older authors. But again, there are some people writing about relevant issues that you just can't find anywhere else.
Yeah. No, there's wisdom in that. I don't want to get too pessimistic about contemporary writers either. You will occasionally suggest somebody who goes off the rails or who commits adultery or something. That's just life in this world. The Apostle Paul at some points in his life was clearly endorsing the ministry of certain people who were later found out to have abandoned the faith or committed grave sins. So I figure if Paul got it wrong sometimes, so will we. And that's because not only are we fooled, but often I think they are fooled. They themselves are fooled. The wool is pulled over their eyes before they pull it over ours. So, I think there is wisdom in that, but also, I do think it's okay to have contemporary people we look up to as well.
Yeah, that's good. I sometimes think about Paul writing in Philippians chapter 1 and in that passage where he talks about, look, some aren't doing it the way I do it, and some are actually being pretty divisive. But the gospel's going forward, and so I'm not going to pull that down, And I think there's really something to that. God uses who He uses, and that's okay, right? And we can be excited about that. Man, there's a lot more there that I'd like to talk about. But moving on to the third topic, right? So you write about so many different things, and I've connected with you just through your blog and the work that you do through so many different topics. But one of the topics that you've certainly discussed, and I know you've experienced personally, and I think all of us have, you have a very close relationship with this, is grief and loss. Man, our world experiences so much grief and loss. And one of the things that has been super interesting to me to observe in the last couple of weeks. We talk about the death of Charlie Kirk. That happened, last week as we record, 2 weeks ago as we record. But not only that, we see images of a young lady losing her life, and we hear about school shootings, and all of these things happen, right? And it's pushed on us, whether you want to watch these videos or see these things or not. It's there. And so even though we may not know everyone that is represented in the media or everyone that is lost and those kind of things, they're not all as big a personality as a Charlie Kirk, but there is a sense of grief. There is a sense of loss. There is a sense of the confusion that comes from that. And often because we don't have a personal relationship maybe with some of these people, we don't have anyone to walk us through the process of grieving, of contextualizing that grief, of learning from it, of moving forward. It's interesting. If you lose a loved one and you're in a faith community, you'll probably have a pastor and you'll have counselors and other people that you have access to at least that can help you walk through that. But for so many people, as we grieve the losses around us, there's no one speaking truth into that and no one helping us understand how to do that. What are some things that we should think about as we grieve the losses that we observe? And, I can even think about things like, we have the abortion debate and we have all these conversations. Man, there's just so much loss and there's a grief that goes with that if we're Christian people that believe that God creates us in His image. But we just kind of move on and don't really address it or deal with it. How do you think about some of those issues, and what would be your advice to people who are trying to get their heads around some of this stuff?
Yeah, man, there's a lot there. It is a very, very badly broken world, and grief is a right and good response to the brokenness of the world. And that's true most often when it's somebody you knew and you loved who has died or suffered something terrible. On the other hand, it may be somebody you don't know but just looked up to, or even a stranger on a trolley who you're just absolutely heartbroken to see the devastation of it and just the injustice of it. So it is right and good to be grieved. God himself is grieved by what's happening in this world. That's an appropriate response. What you do with that grief, I think, is you just have to take it to the Lord and trust him with it. One of the things we found essential as my family, we lost my son just almost 5 years ago now. Very unexpected death. And one of the things we found so essential in our response to that was to really just submit it to the Lord, to say to the Lord, this is your world and you did no wrong. You have the right to give life and the right to take life away. It all happens in your will. It all happens in your plan. So there may be other agents involved. There may be somebody involved who committed an offense, but in some mysterious way, it was still God's will that this would be the end of that person's life. And to just submit those things, or to submit yourself to God about those things, not to hold any blame, not to even allow yourself the slimmest thought that God may have done something wrong, something that impugns his character or anything else. So if we're going to sing, "This is my Father's world," we have to mean it. It really is his world, not just by creation, but by providence as well. Everything that happened, put it this way, there's nothing here that happens outside of God's knowledge and therefore God's will or God's assent. And I find that makes this world a whole lot easier to live in, when we know that God is intricately involved in everything, and yet in such a way that he's not the author of evil. He doesn't make these things happen. These people choose to commit these offenses. So yeah, grief is an appropriate response. And I'm convinced that God gives us many things, his word and his spirit, but his people to help us through grief. And so God does minister to us by his spirit through the word. That's powerful. I hope we all have experience of that, of going to the scripture and knowing the spirit is applying those truths to our lives and giving us hope. But when we need help, we have the local church to go to, and that may be a pastor sitting with us, maybe another member of the church. It may be the pastor saying, "Why don't you speak to a counselor about that?" And a counselor simply being somebody who's specifically trained to apply the appropriate truth of Scripture to a particular situation, both for understanding it and progressing through it. And so I think we have lots of helps if we'll take hold of them. God is very, very willing to help and comfort us in our sorrows.
When you talk about, submitting that to the Lord and we find refuge in the Lord in those moments of grief and brokenness and hurt, we can maybe intellectually assent to that. I need to do that. Or I do believe that God is sovereign. I believe that God is bigger than what's happening. And, it is his world. And what practically can I do to take that from, I believe God is bigger than this. I believe God is sovereign. I believe God is in control. I believe this is his world. I believe that. How do I internalize that in a way that addresses that grief? I don't even know if that question makes sense, but
yeah,
but it's easy for me to tell someone they need to do that, right? And I have as a pastor. It's harder to really get a hold of that, though.
Yeah, in my experience, I think it needs to begin with just owning before myself that my unspoken assumption is that I know how to run this world better than God does.
Right.
And so if God would just do things my way, this would be a better world. Maybe not writ large, but in this specific situation, at least, I would tend to think this world would be better if my son was still alive rather than if God had taken him. That would be my assumption.
Yeah.
So just grappling with that assumption and then speaking to the Lord about that. And we can talk to God like a friend talks to a friend. We can just converse with him, go out walking in the woods and just talk out loud. God's probably not going to speak back in an audible voice, but his spirit's at work and his word's at work. And you can just kind of have these conversations with God. And the end result should be just to say, I'm this little person who's so broken and so messed up and lacks so much knowledge. And I'm the kind of person who trips and falls on his face sometimes. And I'm the kind of person who sometimes means one thing and says something completely different, or the person who blows my stack over little things. I'm not the kind of person who should be running a universe. I can barely run my own house or my own life or my own business or anything else. And so, God, I'm going to hand that to you. not that God needs me to, but he's not waiting for me to hand over control of the world. But I think that's a helpful and healing process to just say, I really trust you. I trusted you with my salvation. I've trusted you with that. I'm also going to trust and trust to you every circumstance of my life. And I'm going to believe, I'm going to have faith, not just faith that saves me. I've done that. I've been justified, but faith that just really says, I'm choosing to believe that what you say is true. I'm choosing to believe this world where my son is gone is better than a world where he was still here. Because somehow in God's mind, Romans 8:28 is true. All things are working for the good. Those who love God are called according to his purpose. We have to believe that. We just have to rest our confidence in the God who makes that promise and trust him that someday he'll prove it to us. And I firmly believe the day will come, I'll stand in glory and I'll think specifically to the night I lost my son when my heart was as broken as it's ever been. And I'll say, God did all things well. And I'll praise him for that.
Yeah.
But that takes faith, right? That takes faith in God and faith in the promises of God to be able to do that.
The natural, tendency of the natural man is to become bitter. And I think you have to revisit that from time to time. How do you deal with creeping bitterness and those thoughts again and again that, I can't believe God would do this, or I would never have allowed this to happen? How do you address that in kind of an ongoing sanctification kind of way as you grow through that?
Yeah, I mean, candidly, I've not experienced any grief. I've experienced lots of grief, but I've experienced no bitterness toward God for the situation. It never really occurred to me to be mad at God about it. I did have to deal with the thought that I could have done it better, and I never explicitly thought that, but that was just sort of in the back of my heart. But I never did experience any bitterness for God's providence in that way. I've experienced bitterness of God's providence when I've missed a flight connection or something. So in these little things that really don't matter much, and I'm going to get home an hour later than I had planned. Why, God? Why would you do that? But when it comes to the bigger things, that really hasn't been a temptation, which again just shows how messed up I am and how unsuited I am to run a universe.
Yeah, man. Man, that's good. It is funny because I think all of us feel, I can definitely feel the missed flight thing. Like, God, why would you let this happen to me? Meanwhile, the world is burning, and I'm mad because I missed my flight. But that prevailing thought that, and we'd never say this, at least most people wouldn't, I could do this better than God. But just rooting that out, I mean, that changes our perspective on so many things, I would imagine.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's good. Tim, I really appreciate it. I know you're very busy. Man, there's so many things that you talk about, and I can't encourage people more strongly than this to spend time on your blog, to get connected to your newsletter and those kind of things, as you constantly work to bring good resources to the fore and talk about these things to your blog. And it's been very, very helpful, and I know will be helpful to others. Where can people find that? Find your blog, your website, get connected to the other resources that you push out?
Yeah, thanks for asking. It's an absolute joy to be able to do that day by day. And so the best place to go is challies.com, CHALLIES.com, or just go to any social media platform and type /Challies, and you'll probably find me. It's a unique last name. Not too many people are interested in claiming those accounts. So you can find the information there as well. But if you do, you'll find articles I write a few times a week, just original articles that just offer thoughts about the Christian life, the Christian world. And then also lots of articles I link to that other people have written as I try and curate some of the content that's being created, serious-minded content for Christians, and then lots of book reviews as well.
And often you'll push out discounts on Kindle books and things like that are also timely and very helpful. I've jumped on many of those offers that you sent out, because you'll sometimes, this book is today it's 99 cents or something like that, and man, that's awesome too. And again, very helpful.
Yeah, no, it's amazing the deals that can be had if you're willing to use Kindle books. Not everybody loves electronic reading, but if you're cool with it, you can get amazing deals. You can build a library at a very, very low cost. If you just stay tuned to my Kindle deal page, every day there's something, and often, just a couple bucks for a book that would otherwise cost you 20, 30, 40.
Yeah. Yeah, it's awesome. And in a lot of different categories too, not just in theology, but in the other categories as well. Tim Challies,
For sure.
Thank you so much, man. Really, really appreciate your time and for all that you do.
All right. You're very welcome.
For those of you that are listening, watching, if you haven't subscribed, do that right now. It's very important you do that. And I'd love to hear from you. Take some time, if you're listening on a podcast platform, to go over to YouTube. You can follow us there. And there we have the podcast, of course, but we have other content that we push out. Content related often to what we call hard questions. So hard questions about culture and Christianity and those kind of things. That's a separate YouTube series that we do there. Also short clips of other content that we do. So please check that out. But again, thank you for joining. Look forward to talking to you next time.